serpent and his slithery speech, and he knew exactly what Satan was suggesting. Eve was honestly deceived. Adam wasn't deceived. And so I think, abstracting from that principle, I think God did not intend women to be at the tip of the sphere in physical combat and physical warfare, but he also didn't intend women to be at the tip of the spear when it comes to spiritual combat and spiritual warfare either. There's a need for men and their leadership and their protection, and the fall happened because the devil attacked the weakness of the leader, not just the weakness of the lady. He bypassed Adam, spoke to Eve, said, Eve, you be the spokesman in the garden. You know you want to be. And Eve started talking, and Adam just sat there and let it all happen, as the proverbial bump on the log. The fall happened because of Adam's abdication of leadership. And a huge part of marital health comes from knowing and embracing your God-given rules. And men, that's often a problem from us. We tend to oscillate between being an obnoxious buffoon and a lazy slob, neither of which is what God means when he speaks about principled leadership in the home. We become a tyrant who's angry, or we become a slob who's lazy. You might prefer the word indolent. Wasn't it Chesterton said, I love the word indolence. It makes my laziness sound classy. But you've got to embrace your God-given rules. Now, when God makes Adam or makes Eve for him, he can scarcely contain his joy. Then the man said, this at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She should be called woman because she was taken out of man. And notice Adam is defining his wife. He's calling her the name woman. He's defining her identity. He's defining her purpose. And he'll do that again after the fall when he calls his wife Eve, which was an act of tremendous faith. God has just said, you're all going to die. And Adam calls his wife Eve, the mother of all the living. He's not just saying that your children won't all be stillborn. He's saying somehow someone will come from you who will ensure that death doesn't have the last word over all of our children. An act of tremendous faith. Tremendous faith. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. We'll come back to that in a second. So, first of all, let me say a few words about selecting a suitable life partner. It's almost certainly one of the most important decisions a human being can make, right? If you think of the book of Proverbs, you've got like about 10 chapters at the beginning that speak about will you listen to the voice of wisdom, right? Before we get to the nitty-gritties of knowing when to shut up, which is most of the time, and how to manage your money and all those things, Solomon is saying, are you willing to be wise, son? And if you're willing to be wise, you must learn to listen to the right voices. And that right voice is primarily your mother and father, and of course God above them, and the woman of wisdom, the personification of wisdom. You need to learn to avoid the voice of folly, the voice of young fools who are with you, the voice of the woman of folly, who will offer you a moment of pleasure and ask you to forget about the lifetime of shame that will flow from heeding her advice and ignoring your parents. And then you have about, 20 chapters or so, from chapter 10 through to almost the end of the book, where he gives you the kind of individual case laws. And then in chapter 31, you have the excellent wife, which I used to think was Solomon giving a nod to the fairer sex, a bit late in the day, but at least he didn't forget you altogether, ladies. But then I suddenly realized one day when I was preaching on this some years ago, it occurred to me, hold on a second, chapter 31 isn't intended for the woman. It's intended for the son. An excellent wife who can find. Her husband safely trusts her. His voice is heard in the gates. And what Solomon is saying to his son, if you want to be the kind of man whose voice carries weight in the gates where the elders sit, who you choose to marry matters a very great deal indeed. The old proverb stands true. Behind every good man almost always stands an even better woman. That's true for me. It's true for Roland. and it's certainly true for Jeff as well. We married up, which is a huge secret to any success God has given us in our life and our ministry. How do you go about doing that? How do you find appropriate life master, appropriate life partner, right? And young people, listen to me here this morning now. If you ignore your parents' concerns, I promise you, your parents knew you before you knew yourself. If you ignore your parents' concerns, those concerns will concern you a lot more in 10 years' time once you've ignored them. There's almost always something to be concerned about when your parents are concerned. Now, mums and dads, don't be that kind of parent. You can only see all of the bad things in the guy your daughter brings home or the girl your sons bring home. That awful blindness that we often have in Reformed faith that equips us only to see the thorns and not the roses, right? And don't be the kind of parents who just head your children in so you never let them make a decision in their life ever, right? God has told us early in life we're very strict, and then as your children grow older, you gradually take the brakes off and let them spread their wings. Most parents try the opposite. They're very relaxed with the kids when they're young, and then when the kids get to be 13 and 14 and start making all the wrong decisions, they then try to kind of bring in the press and shut things down. Doesn't work, right? But I see so many Reformed people who expect the law to do what only the gospel can. They smother their children with rules, but by the time the child's 18, they can't even decide what color of T-shirt to buy. What do you want, son? Oh, I don't know. And then you buy them the blue one, right, or the red one, but not the pink one. You know, and don't be that kind of parent. Have a good target in mind. Quickly, if you want to turn to Titus 2 a second, it occurred to me, I was speaking at a young people's conference recently up in Maryland on sexual purity for men, and I was talking about young men and the identity of men, and suddenly it occurred to me, there's a tremendous confusion about what a man is in our culture today, and what a woman is. And we have to set the target for our young men and our young ladies. What are you looking for, right? And look in Titus 2. Now, Titus is a book about healthy churches, and there are 3 chapters and 3 points. Healthy churches appoint good men in leadership, chapter 1. They preach good doctrine, and they practice good works from the pew, chapter 3. Easy book outline. Chapter 2 is about sound doctrine. But as for you, teach what accords with sound doctrine. Now, you'd expect Paul to immediately launch into what that doctrine is. He does that later down in verse 11 or 12. The grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men. The grace of God has epiphanied, instructing us to say no to ungodliness and worldly desires, and to live sensibly and righteously and godly in the present age, and so forth and so on. He outlines then the experiential power of the gospel. But interesting, what Paul does when he's instructing Titus to speak about sound doctrine, he speaks first of all about the effects of sound doctrine before he gets to the content of sound doctrine. Why did he do that? Well, it's not just because Paul has ADD, which I think he did, because he always went off on these flights of fancy, but it's because Paul wants you to know that it's the heart that makes the theologian, not the head. And you think, what kind of pseudo-evangelical claptrap is this, the heart that makes the theologian? But do you know who said that? It was Benjamin B. Warfield. And do you know who he said it about? John Calvin. He said, John Calvin is an abiding illustration that it's the heart that makes the theologian, not the head. Warfield had the head. He outwrote, outread, and outthought any man of his generation. He had the head, and so did Calvin. But it's the heart that makes the theologian. God doesn't measure a theologian by how much we think in our head merely. That's important. You can't honor God as he is unless you know him. You can't honor God as you ought unless you know him as he is, Charnock said. But it's the heart. It's the life. It's the doctrine that leads to godliness that Paul's after. And Paul defines the effects of sound doctrine. And look at the structure. It's interesting. He goes older men, older women, younger men. That's weird. You'd expect him to go older men, older women, younger women. But he goes older men, older women, younger men. It's almost as if he surrounds the women with a protective layer of manly godliness. That might not be the reason, but I think it is. And notice he talks about what an older man look like. This is a target of masculine maturity. So when you're looking for a husband, young ladies, this is the target. Is the young man you're interested in, is he at least moving in these directions? And men, in marriage this morning, if you want to become a better man, which should be the desire for all of us, these are 4 virtues you want to be practicing. And there are 4 things, Paul says, quickly. Older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith, in love, and in steadfastness. What's that mean? Sober-minded. Sober-minded literally means being level-headed. What's a mature man look like? He's not reactionary. He's able to keep his head when all about him are losing theirs and blaming it on him, as Kipling said. Actually, I don't think he was married, Kipling, because if he was, he'd have said, you're able to keep your head when your wife is losing hers and blaming it on you, right? But being level-headed, right? Level-headed. Is he calm under pressure? That's what a mature man should be like. And secondly, you should be dignified. Literally means worthy of respect. What's respect? Respect is something every man has longed for since he was a little boy. It's why, girls, when you bring your girlfriends round to the house from school or church, and they come in, your little brother starts trying to climb the biggest tree in the garden or pick up the biggest rock because he wants to look strong. Because if a girl looks at a man and sees him as strong, she'll respect him. It's what they want, right? And so respect is a complex mixture of character and competence. You're a good man who knows how to get good things done. When people see that, they respect you. So when you're looking for a young man, is he a good man who knows how to get the right things done at the right time and in the right way? Can he move the bar forward in life? Is he worthy of respect? And then thirdly, sensible. That's the New American Standard, self-controlled in the ESV. The word is sophronos in the Greek, and it means someone who's gripped with right reason. Or, I like to say, they do what they know is right, even when they want what's wrong. They do what they know is right, even when they want what's wrong. And then, fourthly, they're sound, which means they've mastered the basics of 3 areas: faith, love, and steadfastness. They've mastered the basics of faith, trusting God, reaching through the appearance of things and laying hold of the divinely revealed reality. They've mastered the basics of love, loving God and serving others. They've mastered the basics of steadfastness, finishing well. They've mastered the basics of trusting God, serving others, and finishing well. That's what a mature man is like, level-headed, worthy of respect. He does what he knows is right, even when he wants what's wrong. And he's mastered the basics of trusting God, loving others, and finishing well. Now, your young manling that you're going to find, that you're going to be courting, ladies, he's not going to be a fully grown man, right? He should be on the way. When you're looking for those 4 virtues, which is the most important? Well, Paul tells you, young men are to be self-controlled. Same word. They're to do what they know is right, even when they want what's wrong. Because if you can't do that, if you can't master your desires, they will master you, and you'll not be able to master anything else in life that's worth mastering. So when you're looking at a young man, the first thing to look for is he the kind of man that you can trust, who does what he knows is right, even when he wants what's wrong? Which is why, young men, one of the reasons you cannot give pornography any place in your life. Because if you give pornography an inch in your life, you are training yourself. Remember, you become what you repeatedly choose to do. And if you give pornography an inch, you are training yourself to do what you know is wrong, even when God says what's right. And all of that comes from the gospel. For the grace of God has appeared, Paul says. We live this way because the grace of God has epiphanied. And so you want to find a young man, ladies, who's being impacted by the grace of God in their church, and they're committed to hearing a preached message of a felt Christ. And ladies, what about ladies? Well, at the very least, when you're looking for a young lady to marry men, you want to try and find a young lady who is willing to listen to the advice of older ladies. Because the older women are to be teaching the younger women to love their husbands, to love their children, and so forth and so on. You want to find a young lady who's kind and pure, who loves people well. Watch how they treat the little people of the world. It was so encouraging to me in the Gleason home last night to watch the older sisters take care of their younger brother and older sister as well. And it was such a wonderful picture of womanly kindness and gentleness. A great example. Watch how they treat people who can do them no good whatsoever. Also, when it comes to being loving and kind, watch how they process difficult and negative people and events. Do they arc towards kindness and love, or do they arc towards bitterness and wrath? Because bitterness is the poison you drink hoping others die. And you don't want to marry someone like that. They'll poison your home and be toxic. And she should be a good domestic manager and should also like and want children. They should be workers at home. Now, I don't believe that negates necessarily a woman working outside the home. My wife works she has a business of interior design, and she works, and it's more prevalent now than ever was before. She waited till her children were mostly grown before she began to do it. Peaches works making heirloom embroidery and so forth. It's wonderful to see. The Proverbs 31 woman is busy, active, and she's not just cooking and cleaning the house. She's much more busy, engaged in real estate and fabrics and so forth and so on. And so, but women should be good domestic managers. That's obvious because, ladies, what happens if you go away for the weekend? What happens to the home? It turns to rack and ruin whenever we're in charge. So, I cannot overstate the importance of marrying well. You know, you've got to be prayerful and wise. Because in reality, most of us, there really only are 2 or 3, perhaps 4 people you could really marry in life. You're not going to have a choice of thousands of people, right? It's not going to happen. In your life, as you kind of grow from childhood through your teenage years and graduate school and maybe go to college or out into the workforce, wherever, you're going to find that there are 2 or 3 men or ladies that God crosses your path that you're really able to marry, and that providentially there's not going to be a cast of thousands lining up at the front door, probably. And so you need to pick wisely and don't just take the first one who comes along. Back in Genesis 2. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. The man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. This is the heart of marriage, naked and unashamed. And it means much more than the fact that the Garden of Eden was a nudist colony. That's not the point. The point is that there was whole-souled intimacy. As Wayne Mack says, marriage is the total sharing of the total person throughout the totality of life. That there's intimacy here that goes beyond sexual intimacy. There's spiritual intimacy as you share your souls one with another. There's also, of course, sexual intimacy as you share your bodies. But there's also emotional intimacy as you share your heart. And there is intellectual intimacy as you share your ideas. And there's recreational intimacy as you share fun and good times together. It's all part of that whole-souled intimacy. Interestingly, just as a side point, the number one intimacy, of course, has always got to be spiritual intimacy. When God blessed Adam and Eve, He spoke the blessing about the animals, right? Be fruitful and multiply. But he actually spoke that almost the same blessing, but he spoke it to Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve are created to receive the Word of God. And when even Adam is made, he's dust. And then God kneels down beside him, if I can speak anthropomorphically, and breathes the Spirit into Adam. So the first thing Adam sees when he opens his eyes, his first conscious thought, is being alive in the presence of God. What is it that makes you more than dust, Adam? It's my presence. There's also an implied warning there. Walk away from me, and you'll begin the process that will make you less and less like God and more like dust. But so fellowship with God matters. And men, I want to say this, pray with your wife. So many men, even so many ministers, and I'm one of them at times, I have to say, to my shame, we will pray with our kids in family worship, but we don't pray with our wives outside of family worship. We need to pray with them, bringing the burdens of the day, the burdens of their heart to God. Spiritual intimacy. After spiritual intimacy, what's the next important thing? Well, for ladies, it's emotional intimacy. Emotional intimacy. Women are created. They feel, as a rule, more ready for sexual intimacy when they feel their husband is sharing his heart with her, and he's interested to hear her as she shares her heart with him. And when she feels emotionally intimate, then she tends to open up and be more available for sexual intimacy. And for men, it's the reverse. Men often feel best able to be emotionally intimate with their wives after sexual intimacy. And so you have this awful, in a sense, in a fallen world, the devil's bargain, because one will withdraw. The man often withdraw emotionally, or the woman withdraw sexually, and the other person gets their feelings hurt, and then it all begins to unravel. But Adam and Eve were naked and were not ashamed. I need to pick up the pace here. What's that mean? It means that they had the ability to unzip their souls and let the other person in. Let the other person really know them without the fear that what the other person came to know they would find disappointing. And before sin entered, that was the way they were. Adam could let Eve in and not be frightened that she would know him and think, "Ugh, I wish you weren't like that." And Eve could let Adam in, and he could know her all the way down to the bottom, and she was totally free of the insecurity that once he knows me, he'll stop loving me. And at the risk of understatement, the fall has massively complicated and corrupted that whole process. The moment Adam and Eve sinned, they knew they were naked, and they began to cover up from one another, to hide from one another. And they began to run from God, because the presence of shame makes the presence of other people uncomfortable and the presence of God unbearable. And if you're going to navigate marriage well, you've got to learn to deal with shame. What is shame? Well, it's like guilt, but they're different. Ed Welch says, guilt lives in the courtroom, shame lives in the community. Guilt lives in the courtroom. I've done something wrong, I deserve to be condemned. Shame lives in the community. I've done something wrong, I deserve to be shunned and rejected. And shame brings this fear into a marriage that once my wife or my spouse knows me, they'll reject me because they'll not like what they know. And how do you stay on the right side of shame? How do you deal with shame? And we have a lot to say, but I really need to just summarize it and get this sermon to a close this morning. Let me just give you 3 quick take-home points. You've got to get the God question right. That's the fundamental problem that we all face in the fallen world. We get the God question wrong. If you get the God question wrong, you're going to get every other question wrong in life. And by getting the God question wrong, of course, what I mean is idolatry. And really, Charles Dickens said life is a tale of two cities. Marriage is a tale of two gods, the true God and the false God. And if you can learn to know what are your idols and what are your spouse's idols, it'll help you a great deal to living the Christian life. Because it's like a tree, right? Think of a tree. You've got the leaves, and the leaves represent in the tree imagery. The tree represents. Comes to my front door. Okay, good. The tree represents the leaves represent your thoughts, so your words and your deeds. Each leaf is attached to twigs and branches. They represent your thoughts and your desires and your affections. And they all kind of connect back and down to one central trunk that gives life to the tree. And that one central trunk, when we get the God question wrong, is an idol. And generally, most human beings, in my experience, my own life, and my people have pastored over 24 years now, generally, most Christians have one idol. We're monotheists at heart. We're looking for one thing that's so big and so good and so long-lasting, it'll satisfy us forever. And we tend to turn away from God and look to something else down here in creation to be that one thing. And that one thing actually will explain pretty much why you do all of your sin. And for the Christian, those idols come in two packages. They're evil things we shouldn't want at all. That's not normally the big problem, though, for Christians, in my experience. For Christians, the big problem, by and large, is good things we want too much, like respect, the respect of a wife or the love of a husband, or your children succeeding in life, even doing well spiritually. And those things are good and they're important, but when they become the most important thing to us, they become destructive. And they take the place of God. How many women do you know who are poisoned by the yearning for a godly husband to lead the home? And they want it so much, and they get angry and bitter and resentful, and they gossip and slander their husband left, right, and center, and they nag their husband at home constantly. And and they can't see it, because what's more important than a godly husband, they think. And God says, actually, I'm more important. Or what's more important than a child's salvation? God says, I'm more important. And when we allow something else to control us and to consume us the way only God should, it's become an idol, no matter how good that thing is. And when you're dealing with the cut and thrust of marriage, you can spend your life going off and trying to cut off the leaves of the tree, all of the sinful things your wife does that bug you, or that all the things your husband does that bug you, and you'll cut off the tree, the leaves, the things he says and does. But you'll be spending your life doing that. Get back to the root. What is the one thing that's controlling them and consuming them the way only God should? And by and large, that which you can define that thing, it'll be the battle of your marriage. What's the God question? The second thing is the grace question. You know, you can base your marriage on law or grace. Base your marriage on law, and what you're saying really is, you do for me, and then I'll do for you. And I'll do for you, and if I do for you, you'd better not let me down. And if you do, there'll be hell to pay. That's the law. Or there's grace. No matter how you treat me, it'll not affect the way I treat you. I will treat you only on the basis of how God has dealt with me. Where my sin abounds, His grace does much more abound. And learning to let the grace of Christ control us in the cut and thrust of marriage is key and core. And there's more we could say, I'll just pass on. To get the God question right, get the grace question right. The gospel's got to control us and consume us. We've got to be delighted by unhurried time in the presence of Christ, the kind of Christ who touched lepers when they were still lepers. And you become a leper when you touch a leper. And it's the lovely Jesus that teaches us that. And then thirdly, got to get the giving question right. And I'll finish here. We often think a lot of talk in life about finding somebody who is compatible with you in marriage. And I'm reminded of J.R. Tolkien and a letter he writes to his son. And Tolkien, of course, was famously happy to his marriage with Edith. And he said, is it possible that there was somebody with whom I could have been even more happy in marriage and more compatible with than Edith, and vice versa? And he says, as much as it pains me, yes, it's probably true. There's somebody out there in the world who'd be more compatible for me than Edith, and more compatible with Edith than me. But he said, I'd be a fool to think I'd have been more happily married to that person. Because happiness in marriage is not found in finding someone compatible with you. That is a very selfish mindset. Happiness in marriage comes when you are willing to make yourself compatible with the person you're married. To die to yourself, which is always the path to life. If you seek to hold on to your life, Christ says you lose it. As you lay your life down and give your life up and pour your life out in the service of another person, that's when life comes to a soul and to this world and to marriage. And it feels, frankly, more like death than life when you do that. As that great philosopher Clint Eastwood once said, dying is a poor way to make a living, but it's the best way to make a marriage. Unless a seed falls into the ground and dies, it'll bear no fruit. If it were not so, Jesus says, I would have told you. How are you doing in your marriage when it comes to giving your life away and dying to yourself and living to your spouse? That's really what makes a marriage sing.